guys? How y'all doing today? Well, baby, if you were Tisa Tells, we have recovered and we want to talk about what's going on. First of all, everybody that's anti-Diddy, y'all gonna have to stop living in La La Land. Y'all know I'm the biggest anti-Diddy person, but can we talk? The fact that people are out here acting like the feds dropping the predicate offenses to the RICO Act is not a big deal. Y'all are living in La La Land, and I'm sick of y'all talking down to people, condescending. Y'all, let's sit down and break down what's really going on. And I'm going to give you a real world, truthful answer. Not what you hope it's going to be, not what you want it to be, not what it should be, but what it is. Now, let's talk about what it actually is and what it isn't. Baby, the feds literally just said checkmate, or they gave a legal illusion. And the feds are hoping that they got to have their legal cake and eat it too. But the question we need to talk about is, can they serve it? First of all, let's talk about these condescending people talking about something. They didn't drop the RICO. They just dropped the state charges. Dummy, we know that. The RICO is made up of predicate acts that you can prove. The predicate acts that are right now are whether he trafficked Jane, whether he trafficked Cassie, whether he committed attempted kidnapping, obstruction of justice, aiding and abetting, and arson. Okay? I get the fact that they didn't dismiss RICO, but they dismissed the state charges that were some of the strongest, the predicate acts, because you need at least two, and the strongest ones that we spent the whole trial listening to testimony over. Capricorn, Cuddy, all these people, those are now removed. I get the fact that you still have RICO, but have we not been arguing with idiots in the comments about whether Jane was a victim, whether Cassie was a victim? Mofos, the RICO is going to be the hardest things to prove. The RICO's the hardest thing to prove, mofos. What are y'all talking about? God, let's get into this. I'm sick of people. Everybody want to be condescending, want to be the smartest person in the room, but nobody wants to actually talk about reality. Again, nobody wants to talk about reality. Yes, the major RICO charge remains, but that's like saying you still have your house after 80% of the inside have burned down. This is not, listen, the feds are taking a huge legal gamble, and I hope to God it pays off. But this is a gamble, and every defense attorney in Diddy's camp is probably making offerings to the Dark Lord because this was a major win. Now, let's also get into this. Now that we've accepted reality, right? Let's talk about why this might be a legal checkmate. Some legal analysis are calling this move a checkmate, and I get it. Because on paper, it looks like the feds just pulled off the rarest play in federal court. They got their cake, and they're eating it too. Now, you're like, Tisa, what the hell are you talking about? What does this mean? Even though the state charges were dropped, the stories behind them were still told. The jury still heard that witnesses feared arson or physical violence, allegations of bribes and encrypted, shut down messages, and all the worst character evidence that would normally be blocked at trial. And because the feds originally included those acts as a RICO predicate crime, they're able to get it all in under the enterprise umbrella. So what's the legal translation? If those state claims had never been on the list, the defense could have shouted irrelevant, presidential, character assassination, and the defense might have won. But by including them early and only dropping them after the jury heard the evidence, the prosecution got everything in. So even those crimes aren't being charged directly. So even though those crimes aren't being charged directly anymore, the emotional stain is still on the record. The jury already heard it, and they already felt it, and that doesn't go away. So yeah, it's checkmate. Maybe. Now, some legal minds are saying this was expert-level strategy, a chess move, a trap. They didn't need a conviction of the little stuff. They just needed it in the story. But let's just play realistic devil's advocate. What if the jury needs more than feelings? What if the defense lawyer gets up on their closing and says, yeah, people might have felt, yeah, this might have happened, but that's not illegal, and the government's not charging it. So how could this really be bribery? How could this really be well, it's not the bribery staying. How could it really be arson? How could it really be kidnapping? How could it really be aiding and abetting when the government's not even charging that? And they will have a good case to make. Because if he tried to burn somebody's car, where's the arson charge? If they believed it, they would have charged it, and then they would have rested their case. You see what I'm saying? That is dangerous, because if the prosecution, right, doesn't walk the jury to the water, the jury may not drink it. It's not enough to make them feel something. You've got to connect the emotional dots to the legal outcome, or risk losing them in silence. Again, you guys, this was surgical, and I have 100% faith and belief in the prosecution. No doubt. But you can't win a trial just by bleeding out vibes. You still got to land the conviction. And if the jurors start asking, why weren't those things charged? It opens the door for doubt. Strategic genius or legal sleight of hand. Either way, the feds just bet big. And now we have to wait to see if the jury bites. Again, the charges the feds actually dropped, according to the filings, the acts were grounded, the RICO acts in state one, some of the most damning that we saw 60% of the testimony hinge around. They were grounded in state law, not federal law. Attempted witness retaliation, attempted kidnapping, attempted arson, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. These were all state-specific theories being used to support the larger federal RICO charge. Okay? Why that matters and why it's not what it looks like. These weren't the only charges in the indictment. The core federal charges do still remain: RICO, federal sex trafficking, obstruction, and firearm possession. It still remains. So even though the government streamlined the predicate acts, they kept the federal infrastructure strong. They're narrowing the legal battlefield, and they're not walking away from it. Again, you can say, let me just run it over how the feds got their cake and ate it too. Here's again why it got so clever. By including those state-based acts in the original indictment, they got the court to admit testimony and evidence about those events, even though those acts aren't on the final jury checklist. The jury has already heard the witnesses' stories, seen the patterns of violence, coercion, and control, and absorbed the emotional weight of those events. That evidence is now baked into the jury's understanding of Diddy's character and alleged criminal enterprise, even if it's not tied to the checkbox on their final verdict form. That's why some analysts are saying this is a checkmate. The jury got dirty, and the government ditched the legal clutter. Again, it's calculated risk. The feds are betting the jury will connect the emotional dots to the legal charges. That even without labeling kidnapping, the story still screams RICO. But that's the risk, because if you don't walk the jury to where they need to be, how will they know where to sit? Legal emotion doesn't always translate to legal logic, guys, and this move cuts both ways. Again, it's a brilliant trap if it works. But if the jurors get confused or think the government overreached, then retreated, it could all unravel. The jury heard the horror stories, but now the prosecution has to make that mean something. Otherwise, all they did was set a stage for reasonable doubt, and that is a gamble. Because let's not forget, you guys, the jury is not made of robots. Let's not forget for a second that this is a federal trial. Forget all the expert takes, the conspiracy breakdowns, the people that want to be the smartest person in the room. Because at the end of the day, 12 people just like you and me and he and she and they and them are sitting in a jury box. Not lawyers, not prosecutors, human beings. People with emotions, confusion, personal baggage, and opinions they don't even know they have yet. The government, again, is hoping that by removing the kidnapping, the arson, the sex trafficking under New York law, that the case will feel cleaner and simpler. Okay? Now we're going to give them a clean legal map, a RICO, trafficking, obstruction. It's easy, right? But real people don't think in legal cleanup language. We're not dealing with robots who neatly sort out predicate acts and venue law. We're dealing with people who second guess themselves. People who think, wait, they said he tried to burn a car. Why didn't they charge that? And then those questions bubble up. Doubts start to form. Not always out loud, sometimes just silently in a juror's gut. And if just one juror clings to that doubt, you could be looking at a mistrial or worse, acquittal. The human mind doesn't separate emotion from structure, you guys. Most people just hear a horrific story, then get confused when the final charges don't match what they remember. That mismatch, that's where defense attorneys live. And boom, reasonable doubt. I can't stress this enough. The feds are banking on one thing, that the jury will connect emotional dots to legal elements, even without labels. This is a huge gamble, because social media hasn't even been able to do that. Because humans don't naturally do that. They want clarity. They want a through line. They want charges to match the horror. When that doesn't happen, they may start thinking the story is exaggerated, or worse, the government overreached and is now walking back. So the feds might have made the case legally cleaner, and all the political pundits that are so smug and they're saying, I get it. But in doing so, they've put all their trust in how well 12 strangers can emotionally and mentally bridge the gap of domestic violence, coerce, fraud, and control. And that's not law. That's psychology. And psychology is messy. It's unreliable, and it's impossible to predict. This isn't a legal gamble, it's a human one. Because if the jurors don't make the mental leap from story to statute, the whole thing could collapse under its own emotional weight. The government may have played it smart, and I am praying they have. I feel they have. But the question now is, will the jury play along? Anyway, you guys, let me know what you think in the comments. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.